Our scripture reading comes from John chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. Listen for the word of the living God as we read these words. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. The living God still speaks today. Thanks be to God. Saint Ignatius believed that God can speak to us through our imagination. It's called imaginative prayer and is considered a form of contemplation. Ignatius thought that the Gospels are especially suited for this type of prayer because we can accompany Jesus through his life by hearing the various stories and imagining being there. What are the sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and feelings of the event? When I read about Jesus feeding the 5,000, I wonder about the little boy in the story. What was he thinking? How did he feel? Did his life change in that moment with Jesus? In my imagination, this is his story. I am a humble man and not eloquent with words, but I've kept a journal as best as I can throughout my life. I have just a short entry for this day, oh, so many years ago, when I was a small child. It says, "Today, Jesus fed 5,000 people with my 5 small barley loaves and 2 fish. Oh, what a day that was. I remember it well. Passover was coming soon, and people were talking about Jesus and wondering what he was doing. He was healing sick people, creating miracles. Many said he was a prophet and compared him to Moses. I was only a small boy at the time, and little children aren't often seen. So I hung near Jesus and his followers, hoping I wouldn't be noticed and wondering if he was the prophet the rabbis spoke of. They were a little ways up the mountain talking to each other when Jesus looked up and saw a huge crowd coming their way. Somehow he knew they were hungry for food, hungry for healing, hungry for relief from the Romans, hungry for a better life, hungry for a prophet like Moses to save them. I heard Jesus ask about finding bread to feed everyone. And while I thought no one was paying attention to me, one of the disciples mentioned me in my lunch, the lunch my mother had given me. How did they know I had food with me? We were a poor family working hard for everything we had. This was my only meal for the day. And now someone wanted to take it from me. It was only a few barley loaves and a couple of dried fish, a poor person's meal. but it was all that I had. Jesus looked into my eyes and something happened to me. I can't tell you what, I can't really explain it, but I knew I trusted him, and I handed Jesus my small meal. What a feast. Everyone sat down and Jesus blessed the meal and began to hand out the bread and fish. It took a while. There were so many people there. I don't know how Jesus did it, but there was enough to feed everyone. At first, the people in the back of the crowd began to shift and worry that the food might run out and not make it to them. But as it was handed out, more and more was available. Finally, everybody settled. Calm returned to the crowd as each received their share. And then there was talking and eating and singing and laughter as people ate their meal together. As people finished eating, Jesus' disciples began to gather up all the leftovers. One of them gave me enough to feed my whole family, and I was so thankful. I ran home with the food that I was given, and we feasted that night on those leftovers, and everyone in our household was filled. Later, I heard that there had been murmuring in the crowd that Jesus was a prophet, and they wanted to make him king. So they tried to take him by force, but Jesus just melted into the crowd and disappeared. I didn't ever know what happened to Jesus after that, since I was just such a small boy with a great story and food enough for everyone in the family. I heard later he was crucified on a cross by the Romans. What a horrible way to die. Maybe he was a prophet, maybe he wasn't. But I know my life changed that day. All these years later, with a wife and family of my own, I will never forget the compassion I saw in his eyes. The compassion he had for his followers, the compassion he had for the crowd, the compassion he had for me as I handed him the only food I had. That day, I saw food multiply. I saw a crowd sit together to share a meal. I saw how those who are hungry and need to be fed first before they can even think about anything else. I saw a community of people come together to be with each other, even if only for just a short time. From then on, I dedicated my life to creating community around sharing food and meals together. So many people are hungry. And I don't know how it happens, but no matter how many people come to us looking for help, there's always seems to be just enough, even after all these years. There have been some hard years, but my family has always had enough to eat and a little more to share with others. And always, I see his eyes pouring out compassion on us. So I finished working at 7 o'clock this morning. I work third shift at Quick Trip in Rock Hill. It's a different way to live, not one that I expected. Not all that long ago, I worked, some of you have heard, over time, especially when Pastor Tracy was here and all of that, I used to work with Mercy Ships, and they're a hospital ship that works in the African area, particularly on the 1040 window, which is where there's a lot of poverty. And then after that, when I came home, I became a pastor for 5 years, and I worked down in the Morven, Anson County area. And I came up here a lot to talk with you guys about your aquaponics program and help with all the, your mobile food pantry that you have and things like that. I actually ran that for a little while. So you may have seen me years ago running in and out. But about 3 years ago, I decided that life was changing, and I left being a pastor, and I spent a couple of years on the road traveling in my van, which some of you have looked at in the past. I know Susan and Ruth have for sure. And then I realized it was time to settle down again because I needed to make money, because, that's what makes our world go round. During all those times of traveling on board the Africa Mercy and being a pastor, and in the couple of years I was traveling in my van, food and faith was always the thing that mattered to me. Sharing meals with people, ensuring that people had enough food to eat, and to recognize where our food comes from. Working at Quick Trip, I thought it's just a job, a place to make money before I move on and go back out in the van again. But I realized that it's become something more. And, we do ministry in lots of different kinds of ways. And it's a place where, once again, I meet the secular and the sacred. Now, we all know the sacred is everywhere, and there really is no division. But in our lives, in a lot of ways, as we think about and talk about it, there is kind of a separation between the sacred and the secular. And so what do I mean by that? Well, you would not believe the number of people who are up all night working. Factories run 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and they need people to work all kinds of shifts. And so what am I doing at Quick Trip besides keeping a place open, just like a Waffle House that's open 365, 24/7? Quick Trips are too. They're 365, 24/7. They're open all the time. The doors do not lock unless something weird happens. And they have to lock the doors, like the electricity goes out or something like that. And I found that, what am I doing there? Well, in between talking to people all night saying, is this all that you want? Can I get you anything else? What kind of cigarettes was that? What kind of this is that? What kind of that is that? Thank you. Have a great day. See you next time. Similar over and over and over again. There's also food involved. There are grills there with all kinds of hot dogs and taquitos and egg rolls and basic gas station food. There are sandwiches, there's cheeseburgers, there's a kitchen. You can make, you can have pizzas made, you can have ice cream, you can have any of that you want. And we don't do ice cream and pizzas at night, but those are offered during the day. And I realized that, what am I doing? I'm feeding people. I'm feeding working class people, people like you and me, who have to make a living in some way, whether you like what you're doing or not. And a lot of the people who come through there are just trying to make a living, earn enough money to be able to take care of their families, have a home, a roof over their head, and food on the table. It has been an amazing place to work, and I did not expect that. But just like those barley loaves and fishes, it's working class food. We do have salads, and we do have apples and bananas and oranges, but that's as far as you're going to get as anything that fits the realm of healthy, quote unquote, healthy. But that's the way people eat as they need to. I have regulars that come in there 3 times in the night. They come on their break and they get something to drink and cigarettes. They come on their lunch break to get something to eat, usually hot dogs, things like that. And they come on their final break, they get another drink and cigarettes, and then they head home after that, just like I do. It's so different than what I expected it to be. It's so different than what it was a few years ago when I was thinking aquaponics and mobile food pantries and what kind of food are we handing out and where does our food come from? And do people know that, like you guys are growing your food, that there are gardens and ways of producing your own food? Well, let me tell you, the people who come through the store, they don't have time to garden. They're working 12-hour shifts, 5 and 6 days a week. There is no time to garden, and they eat what I have. And it's been amazing to be able to feed them, to keep food on that grill. When I get tired and feel rushed, I remind myself that that's what I'm doing. But it is very different. It's more like feeding the poor person's meal of barley loaves and dried fish. I think about how change happened for that little boy all those years ago, how his life changed, how my life has changed, how what we eat matters and how food changes and how we gather around people. I think about the work that you all are doing here and how you must be feeling the changes in it. It wasn't all that long ago when Tracy was here and you guys were doing your aquaponics program and you did have interns coming here and Irvin was working and the garden was growing and food was going out quickly to the apartment complexes that are around, the one for people that are in senior housing, and then the one for those who are in low income housing. Pretty amazing, wasn't it? And I know things have changed. You guys are getting a little older. I know you can't always do the same things that you were, but there's nothing wrong with that. It just means it's a season of change, just like there was change in that little boy's life. There's change in your life. Yes, it was when he was a little boy. And so that season of change was one of expansion and something different. And sometimes there's the season of change where we not necessarily contract, but we change and recognize that we have differences in the way that we can do things. We ensure that there's space out in the garden for anybody who wants to grow things. We ensure that what we can grow is available to people and all they have to do is come pick it. We plant fruit trees. I know that's been Chris's thing as he has been working as your pastor. We, having fruit trees so that someday people will just be able to walk over here and be able to pick the fruit that they need. Kids don't know where food comes from these days. And you guys are making that available. And someday when you're no longer here, those fruit trees will still be here. And they'll remember that there were people, they may not remember you by name, but they will remember you and how those trees began here and grew here. And even when Chris isn't here anymore and has moved on to another church or whatever, there will also be people who will know that that happened here. What does change look like for you? When you hear this story, what character do you feel close to? In your imagination, what are you seeing as Jesus feeds the 5,000? Does your mind think about the disciples who were there with him, struggling to understand what Jesus was doing? Are you one of the crowd who came and hoped that Jesus would be the prophet and that you would make him king? Were you this little lad who turned over his meal and saw compassion in Jesus's eyes? Or were you just a bystander that didn't have anything to do with the scene and you wondered what all those people were doing that looked like they were having a great time together until they got to murmuring a little bit in the end? Are you with those people who recognize that a poor person's meal of barley loaves, and it's not the best bread in the world, barley loaves are like the lowest grade of bread during this time period. There was lots of gravel and all that kind of stuff in it because as they were making it, they couldn't pull everything out of it. It's the loaves of bread that Ruth also had. And when she was harvesting out in the fields, it was barley. Dried fish, there are a couple of, when I saw something as I was thinking about today and researching a little bit that said it wasn't just fish, it was dried fish. It is backbreaking work to dry fish, to make sure that that's available. They can't just walk into some place and hang it up like we would have today to make it easy. They had to make sure that there was a fire burning so that they could dry it out. At least in Ghana, that's the way that they do it. It's really amazing to watch. They have these pits and they create this fire underneath, and then they lay the fish on top of it, all spiked on these spikes, and they stay with it as it dries all day and all night. The work that goes into that. A poor person's meal that fed 5,000 people that day. As you do the work that you do here, you are feeding people and meeting them at the most basic level. We know that children who have not eaten and go hungry in school can't learn. It's a fact. So ensuring that children have a breakfast and a lunch at school ensures that they can learn. And how do we do that? We provide food for them. That's what you guys are doing. You are providing food for those who need it. Whether it be you as you go pick out in the garden, or whether it's allowing others to come and be a part of the programs that you do here. I know someday the aquaponics program will flow again as grants maybe come in and as time goes on. I know it's not working right now, but the earth is always there for us to use. and not to use in a way that's horrible, but to use in a way that is caring and loving of creation. And know that God looks on us with compassion as we do the work he has called us to do. Amen.